Hi, folks. With Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of exams and grading and how the racialization, the race hustling, the race grifting, the woke has permeated all levels of grading and assessment and so on. And it doesn't matter whether this is an exam for an assistant teacher's aide, which has got to be one of the lower, a kindergarten assistant, or a rocket scientist, or whatever, a lawyer. The racialization, the political, ideological racialization of exams is now all across the Western world, and standards have gone through the roof, gone through the floor. I don't think you get lower. So I just wanted to talk about this generally. Now, it's got into the corporate sphere, as you can probably gather. You don't get low IQ brown and black people who can barely speak English getting hired at the rate that you see without affirmative action and diversity, equity, inclusion, and all that sort of stuff. Nonetheless, various organisations insist that their standards haven't slipped, which is a grotesque untruth, of course. But they use aptitude exams and tests and supposed knowledge tests and so on to select their applicants that go to final interview or get the job, as the case may be. So now, what's sort of strange about this is certainly the people that I've spoken to, and not long ago I was talking to a CEO of a company, and he was raving about how many tests they're so rigorous now they don't hire anybody. Now the idea or claim that he was hiring the best was quite absurd, because I'd sort of walked through the place and seen that a lot of low IQ third world peasants who work in there, they're obviously not hiring the best. They've got a majority of brown chicks, and lesbians, and blue haired this and green haired that. There's no way they're hiring the best. I mean, and this was obvious without needing to sit down and talk to him. So I didn't say anything as he was waffling on about, we've got a rigorous selection process. But what do they mean by rigorous? Do they mean you've got to get top grades, or you've got to show that you've got an IQ of 5 million or something? No, it's quite the opposite. So he eventually divulged us during the course of the conversation that they have a grading system where you have to get, if you get anything over 65%, you're instantly dismissed. You're regarded as too bright for them to employ. That's somebody with that amount of brain power, we don't want them. And now 65 is hardly a rigorous thing. If it was 85 or 90, you'd say, okay, well, maybe, without even looking at how rigorous the test is. But so they assume 65 is instant disqualification. So how low do they go? Well, they're prepared to go as low as 30. As long as you get over 30, you're in the running. But the more you move up the grade, the less likely they think you're going to work out with them. So someone who gets sort of 35, say, is right in the prime zone. But if you're at 55, say, then you're entering the danger zone. So they really want to sort of get around 35 to 40% is really is the sweet spot from their perspective. And he was, again, talking about this quite matter-of-factly, as if I would go along with, or anybody would agree with this, that it was a good thing, that they're willfully and with premeditation eliminating bright people and hiring only dumb people. And now I don't know what the exact relationship between, say, IQ level and getting 35% in their tests. So that's harder. But looking at the people who were there and the quality of them, from what I could see at least, then I would assume low IQ is a reasonably close correlation. Now, it's not the first time I've heard this, that getting rid of or not hiring in the first place. Now, some people, and this was in another place, they they were giving these tests to people that already were on board, already hired, they're already in the company and the business. And a similar thing, if the people who did too well in the test, they effectively invited them to leave. And the majority of those people who did well were straight white males. So it was effectively a device to get rid of straight white males and bring in low IQ, non-minorities, non-straight white males. And so this is obviously a ridiculous and absurd perversity, but it's happening, in one way or another. It's happening all over, and this is something that's dragging the West down. And why do you think some things don't function anymore? Why, when you go into any business or government department or anywhere, you're dealing with someone who at best has an IQ of 90, and they're struggling. They can follow the script, but that's all. And if you come to anything outside of the script, they just stare blankly. If anything, they'll become outraged that you're expecting more of them than they can deliver, because they're, hey, I'm a low IQ dumb fuck. I can't deviate from the script. You may be able to, evil, fascist, nasty, straight white guy, but I can't. You're making me look bad. You're making me feel insecure. So, and this applies, of course, in a lot of different ways. Now, some of it is to do with equal outcomes. So, any organisation might say, well, we don't have enough non-straight white males. Well, that's all right. We'll just lower the standard. Now, an organisation that I've done business with on and off over the past, who had excellent technical salespeople, top-notch guys, an American company, and I was always very impressed. They hired the best people, gave them excellent training, good support, this sort of thing. So they were always a pleasure to deal with. They had all the answers. They knew what they were talking about. They were good to deal with. I admire that sort of professionalism and attention to detail and so on. Anyway, the memorandum went around that having these highly qualified and competent straight white males, it simply won't do. We've got to get more minorities. Now, I knew one of the execs in there quite well, and he sort of mentioned this, but none of minorities just didn't make the grade, and either they didn't have the language or the knowledge. The Chinese, the Indians, the black lesbians, none of them made the grade. So effectively stayed as a straight white male sort of gig. Then at the CEO level, board of directors level, I said, no, it won't do. If we can't find any minority to meet the standard, hell, we'll just lower the standard. So they did. Now, they kept the standard for straight white males. They still had to meet the standard, but they lowered the standard for everyone else solely to get the diversity in there. And so I met one of the technical sales representatives they'd hired. It was an Asian chick, so they had to be brown, had to be female, and English had to be the second language, and all these boxes they had to tick. And the HR department seemed to relish this sort of thing. They get very excited, but it's like they can play Doll's House for real or something. I don't know, but so I had a very short interaction with this Asian, didn't speak English very well chick. And now you say, okay, they've lowered the standard. How far did they lower it though? Which was the interesting thing here. The chick had absolutely no knowledge of the product or the technology on even a secondary basis. Her English was very poor. Did she have, maybe she had expertise in technical sales generally. Therefore, you could say, well, she's missing this and this, but she's got that. No, she had none of that. So the way it washed up was she was the only minority female who actually applied for the job. And so they made the ideological decision just to hire her, even though she met none of the criteria. She wouldn't have made. She wouldn't even have got a job as a trainee or something in the real world. This is how far they're prepared to lower the standards, and that's in a commercial organisation, a private company with shareholders. How would you tell your shareholders? Guess what? We're employing people who are absolutely, totally, 100% unqualified just because they tick a diversity box. How would that go down in reality? Assuming BlackRock's one of their major shareholders, I don't know if it is, by the way, but if it probably is, or State Street, or one of Vanguard or something, then maybe they'd approve of that madness. Looking at other exam type scenarios, say looking at teacher's aid or kindergarten, that sort of thing. The rate of minorities, is more than 50%, where the exam is effectively non-existent, or it's so easy. If a child, this is in kindergarten, if a child sort of falls over and busts their ass, do you fly to the moon or call the doctor? You call the doctor. So even a low IQ person can get that. But if you look at some of these tests or exams, and you look at the multiple choice, and there's not like you have to think very hard. If the child has a seizure, do you go and paint a picture, call your mother and have an hour-long conversation about the weather, or call the doctor? It's that level of simplicity. And so minorities can get 50%. 50% of the pass can be minorities, but they're lower paid jobs, so there's fewer white people participating at that level. And the same thing for, say, nurses, nurses assistants, or a trainee nurses assistant. It's such a poorly paid job with 12-hour shifts that again, with rotating shifts of day and night and so on. There's the representation of minorities is greater there than you would expect. So the standards still have to be lowered, and then lowered again, and lowered some more to ensure the outcomes. Now, it even goes further than that again, as I think we've all seen, places like Harvard and Oxford University and Cambridge in Britain. We don't have enough diversity here, so we'll just lower the standards. Now, the standards are lower. I mean, just to sort of give you a rough sort of estimate here, to get a place in university, 40 odd years ago, 50 years ago, sort of around there, if you weren't getting sort of 68%, you forget about getting any place. The course to sweep the floor you wouldn't get into with that 68. Then they're sort of 75. There are a limited number of places, so it's kind of an option thing. So if a lot of bright kids happen to run up in that year, then there'd be the grade would be higher. And so, if you wanted to get into things like medicine, 85% was really it. If you weren't getting those sort of numbers, forget it. And law and so on. Whereas, today you can get into those courses for minority with 25%. In some cases, black students who don't live in the city and they come from rural areas, they're waved through with a 0% mark, a grade. So it gives you an idea of how the focus is on bringing in low IQ minorities, not determining accomplishment at the top end. Now, all of society suffers for that. All of society suffers now for that. That means that the doctor that you go to see, in all probability, unless they're a straight white male, the doctor you go to see hasn't met even a minimum grade. They haven't passed junior high school, let alone getting into university and getting a medical qualification. And the same goes for engineers or architects or lawyers, or really any professional position. The teaching, lecturing, the list goes on and on. That only the lowest IQ people are being gifted these roles through affirmative action, DEI. But the attempted semblance of saying, no, everyone has to pass an exam is simply not true. So, in the case of, say, social workers, it's decided that the majority of social workers should be minorities. Therefore, the standard has to be lowered to zip. And in many jurisdictions now in the United States, also across the West, there is no exam. They just don't bother to exam. They just get what's called a classroom assessment. Now, this classroom assessment is meant to say, yeah, you know, Shaniqua's doing all right, so she can go and be a social worker. Now they've extended, in some cases, extended the period where you have to be an understudy to a current social worker. So I think it was a 3-month period you have to work, or previously if you passed the exam, passed a rigorous exam, you spent 3 months with a qualified, experienced sort of social worker. And they've said, okay, we won't bother testing anyone anymore, as long as the teacher Shaniqua says that the student Shaniqua can do it, then you know, it's all good. But I think they've extended it to 12 months now, that they have to be an understudy with an experience. So there's some level of cover off there, not much and not enough in my view, because once someone's given the job, firing them is impossible. You know, one of the first times that the company I worked for was opening up an office in the United States. I was mentioning to the company's lawyers about you know, we'd advertised a job, and most of the applicants, not all, but most of the applicants were black, and it was like a job for, I don't know, say a receptionist, you know, admin officer, that type of job, and most of them were black. So I mentioned this to and we lived, or the office wasn't far from when I say wasn't far, you know, a 20-minute drive from a black township or something. So I said, well, maybe I'll interview some black job applicants and see how that goes. The lawyer nearly jumped out of the chair. You know, this was, you know, like there was almost like a bolt of electricity going, no, don't do that, whatever you do, not do that. You know, I advise you in the strongest terms not to hire a black. So I was quite taken aback by his sort of reaction and how animated and forthright it was. And well, why not? You know, who cares? You know, no, if you hire a black person, you will never be able to fire them, no matter how bad their behavior, how disruptive and destructive their behavior. No matter what you do, you won't be able to fire them. You know, do not hire. And then he advised me, don't hire a minority. And if you're going to hire one, make sure it's a straight white female, and don't deviate from that. So, okay. And that was, you know, I wasn't as plugged into the politics of, you know, the racial politics of things at the time. So it was something that I hadn't been aware of. I thought, well, who cares who gets hired? And if the person doesn't work out, then you let them go like you would anywhere. But no, he said, no, you'll never be able to fire them. And if you do fire them, you'll have an avalanche of lawsuits from, you know, black organizations claiming they've been oppressed and, you know, racially victimized and so on. So, you know, I wouldn't say I was ordered to do it by the lawyers, but they were absolutely pointed on that. And if you do get into trouble, you know, with any of these black outfits, you know, if you hire a lady and fire her, we're not interested in representing your company. I mean, it was that serious. Well, okay, all right, well, fine, all right then, you know. And it was probably good advice, I would think. So when you put a minority person into these roles, be it social work or something else, it'd be very, very difficult to move them on, regardless of performance or lack of it. Now, you know, this idea of exams, you know, rigorous exams. Well, we all suffer from having low quality people, whether it be the doctor, the surgeon, or whoever, having low quality people who you know, wouldn't even get 10% in an exam if their lives depended on it. The reverse is that when you have the very best available people, you know, who want to do that work, and so the very best available people, but again, whether it be engineering, teaching, or I don't know, rocket science, or anything, then you have the most best capable, knowledgeable, educated people who are filling these roles. Is that a perfect system? Well, no, it's not. Nothing will ever be perfect. But is that the best we can do for a society where you go to the doctor and you know you're dealing with the best qualified person available to fill that role? You know, to me, that's a comforting thought. Or if I'm dealing with a technical sales representative for very technical products, I'm dealing with the very best they could get for that role. That's again a comforting thought. It means less time is wasted. The job gets done more quickly and more efficiently and so on. But the education system and the grading system, the exam, has failed comprehensively in that department. And now the only requirement is to achieve equal outcomes, regardless of how dumb and stupid the people are. And minorities are the primary beneficiaries of this. You've been with Tacitus today. It's your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.